It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. And as usual, this show is brought to you by cartking.com. That's cart-king.com. You can give them a call at 877-986-7771. Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Perhaps your current business wants to add multiple point-of-sale locations across the country quickly. Maybe the facility you manage right now could add additional revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. Cart-king.com can be the answer to your needs. CartKing.com is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile retail, coffee, food, and carts and kiosks that money can buy. For 20 years, CartKing.com has been working with clients and corporations across America to provide indoor and outdoor carts and kiosks for any application. So what you do is you go to cart-king.com and you check out all the different kind of samples of carts and kiosks that they have, that they produce right now. They'll custom design it for you. They'll custom build it for you, and then they'll ship it worldwide. Anywhere on the planet, cartking.com. That's cart-king.com, 877-986-7771. You give them a call, tell them Ed Opperman sent you, and that's how you get a good deal. Okay. Once again, one of my favorite guests. We got a call yesterday from Detective Mayor, retired detective, New York NYPD detective Jim Rothstein, now the mayor up there in Wisconsin. Jim?
No, St. Martin, Minnesota.
I always get Wisconsin and Minnesota confused. Because I'm an old Bronx boy, but now I'm on the West Coast here. But Jim Rothstein, we've had him on many, many times, about 5 or 6 hours worth of content with Jim Rothstein about the Son of Sam cult, about the Process Church, about the smiley face killers, about the JFK assassination, his involvement with arresting Frank Sturgis, about the Bay of Pigs invasion, which Jim was actually a soldier involved with. So we have him back now today. The last interview we did with him, we had left off, we were talking about Roy Cohn. Just did replayed an interview I did with the retired NYPD detective Mike Cordella. And Jim gave me a call yesterday. He says, hey, I want to get a hold of Mike Cordell and talk to him. So we got Jim. Of course, they never miss an opportunity to get Jim back on the air. So we brought him back today. Jim, remind the audience, who is Jim Rothstein?
Well, I'm a retired New York City detective, and I got involved very early on when they assigned me to work in the hookers because I was from Minnesota, and there were so many of the young prostitutes were from Minnesota. So the captain said I should take care of my own problems, and that's how I got involved. And it didn't take very long, and I learned that everything that we thought we knew about prostitution and human trafficking was totally bull. And that's how I got into this, and it just went on from there.
Yeah, they used to call it the Minnesota Strip, right?
Yep, that's what it was called, and it hasn't changed.
Oh, really? There's still in New York City, the New York City prostitution, the girls still come from Minnesota?
Well, yes, but I'm talking about Minnesota itself. The victims that come out of here, they're all over the world. But, yeah, we have victims here all the time. And I just had in my little town a couple of years ago, they had some pimps tried to grab them, except I knew what was happening and I stopped it. But, oh, yeah, otherwise we'd have lost 2 15-year-old girls.
Now, why do you think that is? Because the girls there are white, they're young, and they're naive?
Yes, and they're naive when it comes to these things. And, you got to be politically correct. You can't tell these kids the truth because then you're not politically correct. And that's why all this human trafficking they're supposedly fighting can't work because they don't tell the truth.
And do you think it's also because the girls are bored? It's like a boring town?
No. They're conned very easily. These guys are hustlers. And, I knew them in New York. I got to know many, many of these guys. Even here a couple of years ago, we had like I say, the incident here, and then the human trafficking. And I went to this meeting, and they were talking about how there was nothing like that going on. And once I identified myself and told them a story, I said, it's nice to see after 47 years, somebody's finally doing something. And within 1 month, I identified 32 active pimps right here within 30 miles of where I live. And that was just the start. And I had 42 victims identified. That was 2015 or so when I did that. So it's still here, and that's the way it goes, you know.
Now, do you think like the federal government, the FBI, and even state and local police departments are doing enough to combat human trafficking?
Well, the problem is anybody, I don't care if you're FBI, police, IRS, customs, if you go after this stuff above the lowest street level, your career is over. And I have names that's as long as my arm of cops and agents and stuff. I just had a guy here a couple of years ago, and I gave him some information, and within about 45 days, he was gone, and I never heard from him again. So that's the problem. You know, there's plenty of guys that would do their job, but you get shut down. Like I got shut down and retired. They invoked national security on me, and I was retired. So that's how that went.
Now, why is that? Because prostitution and child prostitution is used for blackmail purposes?
Yes, it's called human intelligence, human compromise. And they don't want to talk about that because they've been using this for many, many years. Like I said, I first ran into it to my advantage. I had one of the best pedophiles in the United States as one of my trusted people. And one of the first things he did for me was compromise Cardinal Spellman. And he gave me Jack the Sailor, who had been a victim. And with that, I didn't have to worry about him coming after me because that time in New York, he was one of the most powerful men. And with that, I never had to worry about them again.
And this human trafficking and this compromise, this blackmail is done at the highest levels at the CIA and even the Secret Service. We can see from the Henry Vinson and Confessions of a DC Madam and that kind of stuff.
Well, I don't know. I just know, like, I had the stuff on the Watergate break-in, and we had all these other people. And as you know, Ed, I don't talk about something that I haven't personally checked out other than looking on the internet. If I can't go there and look at it and see it, I don't go with it because I have seen too many times, as you look on the internet now, and you look at all the disinformation that's on there about this stuff, it discredits the whole thing when you're trying to fight human trafficking, you know?
Exactly. The audience should know that Jim has always said from the very first time I've ever met him, and even before I met him, when I heard him, the first time I ever heard an interview with Jim, he only likes to talk about cases that he's personally worked on, things he's personally experienced. Am I right?
That's right. And they're still coming in to this day. You had mentioned at the beginning of the son of the smiley face killer. I still have a victim of it right now that calls me regular because, you know, she's scared and trying to hide. And so it never has stopped. I get calls at least once a week where somebody needs help or something like that. So it's never stopped.
Yeah, you're talking about that girl, Nikki, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I interviewed Nikki, and she seemed really, really panicky, and it was really hard to really get her story. She's
well, that's true because these victims are that way, and that's why not everybody can deal with them. You got to know how to talk to these people, you know, and not saying you didn't, but and she's a typical a victim, you know, that's hiding. And with that comes all these other things. But, you know, it's just the way it is. And after all these years, you know, I've talked to many, many people like her. I think I even told you the story about the girl we had that was catatonic for 2 months. She wouldn't even respond to electrical stimulation or pins or anything like that. And yet I walked in and I just, you know, addressed her and she came out of it. And I never forget, she got up and threw her arms around me and all she would say was, help me, help me. And we got her. And I never forget that. So, there's a lot that goes with this.
And you talk about, too, that there's a lot of disinfo on the internet, right?
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples? Can you give us some examples?
Well, the different things on the internet, when you look at it, the information that people put out there is not accurate. And then when you go with it, you self-destruct, you discredit yourself. And there's so much of that that you almost can't even believe anything you see on there.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I call it the white noise, that's out there to distract and confuse. Yeah. But can you give us can you give us some examples? Like what do you mean exactly?
Well, it's like one of the things I had done, and somebody asked me about something if I had heard it. I said, yeah, I heard it. And the next thing I knew, it was out there that I said it was true. It wasn't that way, And I've already seen things that were on the internet that from, like shows I do and stuff, where somebody went and changed the stuff.
Mm.
When they rewrote it, they didn't write it accurately. And just specifics, I'd have to sit down and go through it. But there's so many things like that. And then when you read some of these stories, well, that's true. You mentioned Roy Cohn.
Yeah.
How many people really knew who Roy Cohn was? I did. And you read these things, and it's not true. The guy was who he was, and he was not a nice guy, but you got to tell the truth, otherwise it makes no sense.
Yeah, we were talking about Roy Cohn off the air yesterday, but the last interview we did together, I was just getting to Roy Cohn. What can you tell us about your experience with Roy Cohn?
Well, the very last time I saw and met with him, I had called him and told him I needed to talk to him. So I went to his apartment right off of Park Avenue, and I walked in there and I spent 3 hours with him interviewing him. Or talking to him, as I used to call it. I didn't interview anybody. I talked to him. And what was interesting was he was very cooperative because he thought I knew that those 3 little boys that were killed on East 64th Street were buried on his property. And I really didn't find out about that until he died, and it was in his obituary, because the original information I had when these 3 boys got killed was that they were buried in Connecticut on a farm of 110 acres with a stream running through the house. And in one of Roy Cohn's obituaries at the time, it described this piece of property. We had at the time, which was not from 71 to 78 or so, actually maybe 80, we actually had gone to Bridgeport and Hartford, Connecticut looking for it because there was a survivor. The only thing is he didn't know what town it was. And he first thought it was Bridgeport, and we spent a whole summer looking there and didn't find him. And then we went up to Hartford and we didn't find it. So that's how it finally came out. And I had a number of times had encounters with Roy Cohn, with people he represented and stuff. So he knew very well, but he just assumed that I knew about this. And it was a very interesting conversation. We discussed all this and how it worked. He says, my job was to compromise people. And then when our people got caught, it was my job as a lawyer to get off. And what's not long after that is when Troy, and that's what it was, because there are people who thought, he might have this to me, which he didn't know. He was a stand-up guy.
What was the circumstances around the death of those 3 little boys?
What it was is they were using these 3 little boys to compromise 2 people. And during the sex, they ended up killing these 3 boys. And what it was in my informant's apartment. And I use the word informant very loosely because that's the proper thing to say. But he was a source, and he was in the hospital. They killed both boys out about it. And we ended up, identified him. I knew in that. And we verified that they were killed because, like I say, 1 boy survived. The 4th one is the one that gave us a lot of the information. But the original information came from a guy who originally the information I had was that Dr. Rockefeller looks like Quasimodo and supplies little boys to the United Nations. That was the original information I had. And it took a little bit, and I was able to identify him, and his real name was Ben Rose. And he ended up, and when I arrested him, that's why people nowadays even say, well, Jim, it doesn't show you arrested him. No, it didn't, because we arraigned him in a hotel room so that everything was, confidential. because he started talking as soon as I grabbed him. And we caught him with 3 little boys from Baltimore, Maryland at the time. So that's how all of this stuff got started. But, it ended up that they had killed these 3 little boys they were using to compromise somebody. And eventually I identified the guy, and I was with the State Select Committee on Crime at that time. The governor of New York had appointed me and my partner Rosenthal to do this. And we were appointed over the mayor and the police commissioner's head. And we served them with a subpoena. And before we got back to the office, they invoked national security on us. And it wasn't long after that I was retired.
Dr. Rockefeller was Nelson Rockefeller?
No. Dr. Rockefeller was just a street name.
Okay.
His real name was Ben Rose.
Okay, Ben Rose.
Had nothing to do with the Rockefellers. That's just what he got called. See, this is why I say people will see this on the internet and they go, oh, it's one of the Rockefellers.
Right.
No, it wasn't. It was a street name.
What about when you see stuff on the internet, like about Pizzagate? What do you think of that?
Well, I don't know because I don't know anything about it, but I can give you 5 cases that over the years that were almost exactly like what they describe Pizzagate is. So, yes, this stuff has been going on since I started in 1966 on this. We had various different things, but the biggest one was the Watergate break-in.
Right.
That was the ultimate one. And as you know, I ended up arresting Frank Sturgis, who had also been the guy on the grassy knoll in the Kennedy assassination, and he was one of the Watergate burglars. And, we talked to him, as I said before on your show. We spent 2 hours with him before anybody knew we had him. And, there was a whole bunch of stuff that went with that. And, he told us what it was. Plus, I had informants at the time that knew what was going on in Watergate with the pedophile book,
And that was also involved Mo Dean, Howard Dean's wife, John Dean's wife, who was involved in an escort service?
Oh, yeah, and there was much more because, first of all, there was a prostitution ring, but the big thing was the pedophile ring. And what we call the book, which is the files where they kept the records of all the customers. And if they would have got that file, they were both Democrats and Republicans that were using that service. And they had records of it. That's what the human intelligence is. In every arrest I ever made or was involved in with that, there was always the records that were important, because one time we went to arrest or get a wiretap on one of the biggest things that was ever going in the United States at the time. And before we could go and get our wiretap, which they turned down, they went and raided the place so that we couldn't get the files. So that's how that works.
And you were the first person to tell me to go interview Robert Merritt.
Oh, yes. Robert Merritt was a very young victim out of West Virginia. And there were some things that he said. And then one particular thing was about some information that I got, which led to the Franklin cover-up. And he knew about that and where it happened. And so there were some things that he said that I knew were true. And as you know, many of my sources were never identified. You'd get a phone call, you'd get a note under your windshield wiper, you'd get something, and that's how we worked. So I never really knew who he was till Doug Caddy and somebody else introduced me to him, and a couple of the stories he had matched what I had. So that's why I knew it was true.
Yeah, and I've interviewed Doug Caddy several times myself. And Doug Caddy was the first attorney for the Watergate burglars, and he co-wrote a book with Robert Merritt.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. Now, what do you make of Doug Caddy's claims that the motivation behind the JFK assassination was because of the alien presence? He's into this whole alien stuff. What do you make of all that? I know, man.
I'm going to tell you something.
Yeah.
I did some work on that. not the alien, but the results of it.
Okay.
And, yes, what some of the things that they're saying, and I was told right away, don't call it alien, UFO, or anything, but this is a science that has been going since early in the Nixon days. And Merritt even tells the story about how those files were buried, and evidently they just came to light here a couple months ago.
And you believe all that stuff? Because I just interviewed Doug about that. You believe all that stuff about Nixon taping stuff to Merritt's chest and this letters to Kissinger? You believe all that?
Well, I don't know if I believe it, but I know that this stuff really happened because I checked it out. I went there. Like I said, I don't talk about anything, and I went out to Yuma and other places. At one time, I got called to Washington to interview whistleblowers. And among one of the whistleblowers was a guy who was right out of it. And I went to Yuma, Arizona, to the proving grounds, and I talked to people. And a lot of this stuff was verified. How accurate it was, as far as I knew, it was 100% accurate. And what if he pinned it to his chest? I don't know. I didn't see it, but that's the way these things work. And some of the stuff that Merritt describes are exactly what I saw. So I don't know. It has to do with energy, different fields of energy. I'll give you an example. There was a soldier allegedly that got zapped with some energy field, and he went to a nurse in Phoenix, Arizona. And I ended up interviewing that nurse, who verified that this guy came there and he died. And he had died from, some type of a energy field that they were not knowledgeable about. So again, this is how I verify things. I go and check it out. And I talked to the nurse, and she said, yeah, we don't know, but it was something that, like, as she described it, he was cooked, but by some type of energy. So these are the things. And then, there was more that goes into that. And, but is it true? I don't know. I want to see if it comes out. And like also Nixon, here's another thing I don't think I've mentioned on your show. In 1972, right after the first of the year, we had just convicted, it was the New York Police Department, Columbus, Ohio Police Department, a couple others, and FBI, IRS, and that. We had convicted 11 of the top 12 pimps in the United States. And after that was done, a person was sent to me to talk to me that Richard Nixon wanted to have a special investigation that was to be run out of his office into human trafficking and such. And that was a couple months before Watergate. And I've often wondered if that was another reason why they had to stop Nixon, because they knew what we were doing.
Back to Doug Caddy for a second. What do you make of his involvement with so many of the JFK conspirators? You know what I mean?
We have talked, and he always tells the story about he heard me on the radio and called me, and we've been comparing notes ever since. And you know what was interesting? He verified many of the things that I had already talked about, because he was their lawyer.
Yeah.
And there's much more that goes with that. But yes, Doug, that's why he just wrote a book called Being There, which is just dynamite what he talks about. How when you're on the inside and you have no idea how you got there or what the reason was till you find out the rest of the story. And with me, how did I stumble in a stuff? It wasn't that either.
Doug's information is dynamite. I think I was like, when I first entered Doug Caddy, no done anything with him. I didn't interview him, and nothing on the internet or on you could nothing. Okay, and I got a bunch of people saying, "Hey man, Doug Caddy was friends with E. Howard Hunt. They shared an office, I believe."
Yes, and he knew Frank Sturgis very well,
and Guy Bannister, and he knew all these guys. And
and he was with what's his name in Texas. I can't think of his name right, the very wealthy guy. He was with the right people.
Yeah.
And again, like you said, he came out of an office and got sent down to Washington, and the next thing he was in the middle of this.
Yeah.
And then when we compared notes, well, it clarified many of the things I had, and I clarified many of the things he had. So, yes, Doug is just unreal, the information he has. And like he said, once I knew what it was, then I understood it.
Yeah, and I like Doug very much, and we're friends on Facebook, and he's a very good guy. But do you believe he had prior knowledge of the JFK assassination?
That Doug did?
Yeah. He could have.
That I don't know. I've never asked him. I will have to ask him once.
I've asked him. He told me no. But
yeah, I believe he didn't because, number one, like I said, I locked up Frank Sturgis.
Right.
And this was about 15 minutes after I had put my gun out and told him about my chat, and we were sitting to read the rent. People, to be honest. And that was, I thanked him for, and this recalculated assassinate John Kennedy. Because remember, I was in the Bay of Pigs. I knew what happened there, and I knew about this other stuff. And that's when he said to me that he was one of the two shooters on the grassy knoll, and the other guy was E. Howard Hunt. And he never said that he killed Kennedy. All he said, he was one of the two shooters. And I knew enough about Sturgis that if he pulled the trigger, he did this. And so we talked to us because we got out that we had we're going to come to sit, but I told us all about that stuff, and and his head was out. They did him in the pigs. Told me, only you know that via USS, and I was, so you cupped.
Yeah, and people work on obvious interviews we've done with Jim Rothstein, and where we go into great detail about all that. People complain that I interrupted him a couple of times, so I never interrupt him again since that's it. Okay.
Well, there's nothing stranger than the truth when you deal with this. And there's many things. I just had a visitor here a couple of weeks ago, and a very knowledgeable guy. But, it's amazing how some of these experts that have no idea what it was, unless you were there, like that night on the bridge on the Essex. How many guys are on the bridge at 3:30 in the morning when the captain came out with that stuff? There's only so many people. And since then, people who have read it, some of my old shipmates, one of them is a guy from Indiana who described how he took the bodies. Well, right after this happened, I was also the winch operator, and about noon we started bringing bodies on board, and he talks about how he put the bodies in boxes because I dumped them on the deck, with cargo nets, and they would put them in. And then another old shipmate of mine called to say, Jim, I was the guy that unhooked the one end of the net so the bodies would come out. So you tell me, isn't this pretty accurate information?
Yeah, and once again, we can go back to the archives. We did a whole 2 hours with Jim about the Bay of Pigs invasion. Let's take a little commercial break. Jim, by the way, Jim, you don't have anything. You don't have a website or a book or anything you promote, right?
No. I've got this stuff written up. In fact, it's called The Way It Was. And basically what it says about it, true and factual recap of human life, religious, historical events, the way it was from the gutters of Times Square to the elitists of power, the way it was wallowing with the pigs and soaring with the eagles. And underneath that is the price that society pays for political correctness, which is just what it is.
And have you ever tried to publish that, like on CreateSpace, where you could self-publish yourself on Amazon?
I got somebody that prints this up for me. Yes, I'm very selective on where it goes to with that. In fact, I just got the final the way I want it, my way. But now we're editing it for the intellectual, so the commas and the periods are in the right place. Gotcha. In real life, I didn't do that.
Okay, great. Let's take a little commercial break, okay? We're here with Jim Rothstein, retired NYPD detective. Really lived a life, lived one of those lives where he's gotten himself involved in things and been at the right place at the right time, knows a lot of things, and is not afraid to talk about it. We'll be right back with more of Jim Rothstein right after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. PureSoapFlakes.com, 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with pure soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures and sensitive skin, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. Order today at puresoapflakes.com, greenhome.com, amazon.com, or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild.
Hey you, podcast listener. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. Take the blue pill. You wake up in your bed and go back to listening to mundane podcasts that won't challenge your religious beliefs and your so-called truths about reality, the universe, and consciousness. Take the red pill. Subscribe to the Event Horizon podcast, hosted by Mark Anthony Peterson, and he will show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Event Horizon takes a walk into the paranormal with a splash of conspiracy. It's the podcast that would be born if David Icke and the X-Files had a baby. Subscribe to the Event Horizon podcast by Mark Anthony Peterson on Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Stitcher, or any of your other favorite podcast platforms. Remember, all we are offering is the truth, nothing more.
Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Maybe add new point-of-sale locations across the country quickly, or bring in revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services to your office building, warehouse, or lobby? CartKing.com is the answer to your needs. CartKing.com is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile retail, coffee, food, carts, and kiosks that money can buy. For 20 years, CartKing.com has been working with clients across America to provide indoor and outdoor carts and kiosks for any application. That's www.cart-king.com. Give them a call at 877-986-7771. Tell them Ed Opperman sent you. So you go to the website, cartking.com, you check out their different designs and models. You pick out which design applies to your business. They'll custom design it for you, custom build it for you, and ship it worldwide. cartking.com.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here today with the NYPD detective, retired Jim Rothstein, now the mayor of a town up there in Minnesota. Now, Jim, are you familiar with an internet phenomenon called QAnon?
Yes, I've heard about it. And again, it's the same thing that I said before. I've heard about it, but I have not been there to check it out. All the things I've heard were happening many years ago, and I've never known them to be stopped. So, why isn't it true?
Okay, well, but the theory behind QAnon is that this guy with a very high-level security clearance is making these disclosures. Do you think it's possible that someone with a high-level security clearance could violate that security clearance and post things on the internet?
Oh, gosh, yeah, why not? People, you'd be amazed how many people like that have come to me. You got to remember one thing. I could never have done what I did without detectives like we had in New York and around the country, federal agents of every denomination who had things that they could not bear to cover up. Something would make them, and I give the story about how I'd be walking the streets 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and somebody'd come up to me and give me information, and I knew they were agents of one type or the other. So why couldn't this be? You got to remember, there's a lot of honest people. Their souls won't let them do this, so they start talking, and that's what made me. That's how I got my information. And not only from them, but then when you had some of the most high-level hookers and pedophile working for you the same way, they all got somehow their conscience catches up with them. And if you sit there and listen to them, they'll tell you. And I call it that you learn the street talks to you. It tells you everything. All you have to do is learn to listen. And yes, I believe that there could be somebody like that because I had numerous people like that come and give me information. There's a man to this day, I've never met him, and he would call and give me information, and it was always accurate, and some of it was such a high-level stuff, he had to be in somewhere in the intelligence community.
I can appreciate that, but in a situation like this with QAnon, where he's claiming that he's at a level where there's only about 20 others with access to the information that he has, and if he was violating
that,
yeah,
oh yeah.
Well, wouldn't they pull them all in and give them polygraphs and see who was the leak?
Do you honestly believe that polygraphs are as accurate as they want you to believe? I remember a case where they had a man had been a victim, a victim of pedophilia and all that. And I told him, and I know who gave the lie detector test. And I said, that man cannot pass a lie detector test. He can't even tell the difference between day and night. And guess what? After 3 tests given by the best, they came back inconclusive. See, there are people that can beat a lie detector test. They don't even have to try.
No, I would agree with that. I know someone firsthand who did beat a polygraph test. I know the guy was lying. I saw him beat it. Okay. So I know it can be done. And this was given by guys in Brooklyn who were working for the DA's office in Brooklyn. So I know it's possible.
Yeah. Oh, I could give you some actual cases where I know. But, and that's why another thing, they want you to believe some of this stuff. It's not true. And when a guy like this comes forward, and even if it's not a real person, somebody is feeding this information to something that puts it out there. Who, I don't know. Like I said, I haven't worked it.
Okay, then, and you know the story that behind Q is that there's about to be mass arrests and that there's all these sealed indictments and that Trump is about to round up all these pedophile rings. What do you think of that?
Well, I've had calls on that from when it started. In fact, the last call I had on it was last Thursday, stating that this stuff is, and I've been involved in, where we had sealed indictments and stuff.
Right.
Yes, I've heard about it. And I know some of the stuff, I know firsthand that it's true.
Right, because you just told me on the phone yesterday that you've heard that there is a secret grand jury impaneled?
Yes, in Washington or somewhere. As you know, secret federal grand juries are not rare. And, I've been involved with grand juries at every level, and I know how they work, and I know what you can do, and I also know that sometimes these indictments are never made public.
I would agree with that as well. But now the source who's telling you about this secret grand jury that's in favor of Trump, that Trump is behind this grand jury, this is a source you trust? Oh,
without a doubt. I still have people who tell me what's happening. And remember, a lot of people equate Trump to Roy Cohn for evil.
Right.
And who else was there? Roger Stone.
Right.
These people knew that's what it's all about, and there were people like myself in New York. We knew what was going on. It's just that, like I said, they invoke national security on you and retire you. That's how it happens. But who says that all of a sudden somebody took the next step with it? And there isn't a more likely guy than Donald Trump to do that.
That you think that Donald Trump is actually, as QAnon states, is out to round up these pedophile rings?
From the information that I got, yes. I don't know to what level. I don't know. I just know that at the level I talked to, yes, it is going on.
Okay. And even though, like you said, he comes out of this group of Roy Cohn and Stone and these kind of characters and people like Adnan Khashoggi, other people that are involved in human traffickers, that even though he's friends with people that are human traffickers and rapists, that still he's somehow.
Well, what do you think I did? You can't catch these people or find out what it is unless you're there. God, I was with them people every night. I drank with them and everything else. That's how I learned what was going on. And he learned that because how many people know, you were from the Bronx, right?
Yeah.
How many people know how big business in New York really works? How many people even know about the cash underground in New York? How many people actually know that? You know, when you're in big business in New York, there are certain people you deal with. You can't even pour the foundation of a building without certain people having an interest in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Sure.
And this is what they don't understand. And then they try to make the guy a crook. Well, then was I a crook because I spent my time working on these people? No. You didn't have to be one of them. All you had to do, and here's the word it was used, honesty with integrity. I never took bribes. And I was offered them. The best one I was ever offered was $1 million in cash. So this is what happens.
Okay. But now, Trump's personal behavior. Okay, you say that Cohen was involved with the pimping out these little teenage boys.
No, I never said pimping.
Oh no, okay.
He was involved in when they needed somebody compromised, or if one of their people got caught, he got them off. That's what he did. I never heard that Roy Cohn ever pimped anybody.
Okay. But these missing boys were used for some type of prostitution, so blackmail, right?
Yeah, well, what's the best way to compromise somebody is with little boy. Girls, they'll sometimes go along with, but, you know, that was supposedly the worst thing to compromise somebody with is a couple of boys, and two of them were 14 and one was 15. So, and that was just one of many cases, by the way.
So do you think that Trump would be aware of that kind of behavior with Roy Cohn?
Roy Cohn knew about it.
Would Trump be aware of Roy Cohn doing that kind of stuff?
No, Cohen didn't do that. He's the one that they called to cover it up, to handle the legal end of it. That's what his job was. If somebody got caught up, he would take care of it. Would he know about it? Why wouldn't he?
Okay, how about this? So Trump would be aware of Roy Cohn doing that kind of stuff.
Well, I can't see why he wouldn't be, but I don't know to what level.
And Trump would also attend parties at Studio 54 along with Roy Cohn.
Oh, I never saw that personally.
No, you can see pictures. There's pictures on the internet.
I infiltrated Studio 54.
Oh, really? Tell us about that.
Oh, well, that shows how it worked. I had this particular girl of the night that looked like Raquel Welch, only was a little taller and a little built. And this particular night, we also had a cop that had a chauffeur's uniform or a hat, and we rented a limousine, and she was going to take me in there. And I'll never forget, she wore this silver lame outfit open to her belly button with a diamond in it. And they dropped us off about a half a block from the Studio 54, so we had to walk up to it. And you know what? They didn't even look at me. They looked and let her right in, and I went in with her. That's how you did this stuff, And I was in there, and nobody looked at me. And I was there a couple of times, but I always used her because, we could go in. The Studio 54 was nothing compared to some of the other operations in New York.
That's true.
It was another thing you don't hear about. And if you were there at the time, they were called juice joints. And these were run by the mob. And what it was, they served juice, pop, and stuff. And you could go there on a night, and there was one right off the 59th Street Bridge, and there was another one on the east side, and you would see 200-300 kids in there. And if you grabbed one of them, nobody knew where they came from, who their parents were, and these guys would come by with the limousines, and they'd pick up kids and stuff. Sometimes you never saw them again and stuff like that. See, that was going on in New York at that time. And I knew who was running the places and everything. We had it all infiltrated.
No, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I have an ex-girlfriend who used to go to Studio 54 when she was 15 years old. As a matter of fact, one time she met Steven Tyler. And it coincidentally, too, Tiny Tim came to her wedding. He performed at her wedding and brought along a 15-year-old girl that later on, Tiny Tim and the girl went to work for Roy Radin's Traveling Roadshow. Okay.
Well, I knew Tiny Tim from 46th Street.
Everybody knew Tiny Tim. I know about 25 people who knew Tiny Tim.
Yeah, well, again, like I said, that's what I did.
Yeah.
And, our job was to go to these places, and that's what we did. The Haymarket, I can go on and on and on about these different places, but that's what my job was. And that's how you learn these things. And I have one I wrote up. It's called The Nod. I walked out of the Casa Dario bar on West 47th Street, and across the street was this blonde hooker who gave me information at levels you can't even imagine. And she nodded. And I followed her around the corner, and she told me about a narcotics operation at 321 East 48th Street, that I should be careful because it was a government operation. I mean, these are the kind of that. And the last time I saw her, she told me that she was marrying Greeks to bring them into the country. This was like in the late 70s. So this was how this worked. You know, you never knew who was going to give you something.
Around that time, too, especially, I'm thinking of John Casablancas, Elite Modeling Agency, right?
Yeah.
What can you tell us about him?
I don't know about him, but I can give you my modeling story. There was a girl from Michigan. She won a contest, so they brought her to New York. Get my girls in the bars that night, start to talk to gun in away. There's go about a minute, and I'm ready here, but I and we back this year, they come in here to me that they didn't know what was happening. They were going to pay me. And I don't remember the modeling agency, but this is, again, a true story of something that actually happened, so I know it was going on. And there were other things with phony modeling agencies, and I know some of the legitimate ones were being used too.
Yeah.
I don't know if the owners knew about it or not, but that I don't know.
What about Jeffrey Epstein? Did you ever run across any stories about Jeffrey Epstein in New York?
No, not when I was in on this, but like I said, there were guys that made them look like pikers. You know, there were some things we uncovered. The biggest one, like I said, I had an informant, and we were going to put a wiretap on it, and they sold us out and busted the joint and got all the files before we could get there. And they knew what that was because we had infiltrated it.
But now, you don't believe, though, that Trump has been compromised through his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein?
I don't know. I don't think so. I never, and I want it perfectly clear. In those days, he was a rising, just getting into the business, and later on in the business world, I knew him. There never anything that we ever got that was able to be verified that he was involved. He was a young guy, so yeah, he was going out with women, but never anything that was illegal that I ever got.
That you ever got.
And I'm sure if he'd have been, somebody would have told us, because he was that, well known right off the start, because his dad was big into that business world.
Yeah. Now, what about, go ahead.
Yeah. What, Ed?
Yeah. Are you familiar with allegations or widely known stories? The Plaza Hotel back in the late 80s, early 90s, that they had floors up there with all kinds of prostitution going on, and you had to have a special key card to get in.
Did you ever hear of a hotel in New York that didn't have that?
No, of course. But no. I know there's some that don't. I'm sure there's some that don't. But this was, pretty notorious that the girls from Scores would talk about the Plaza Hotel at that time. Oh,
you not only the Plaza, you won't believe. It was like, it was, again, there were so many places that had that set up. It was just part of doing business. We got some of these people. We had people in there. Just to give you an example, one night we needed some information on a very high level information, and I took this lieutenant. There were 13 girls who was getting ready to go out and work, and we were sitting there drinking a can of beer and telling the girls what we needed, and it only took a couple of days and we had everything we needed. That's how it worked. And these girls there wasn't a place where they went to. You had Magoo's, you had the Tatler, you had all these places, and these girls were in there. That's how they made their living.
Oh my God! Just hearing Magoo's, brings back memories. I tell you, I kind of miss New York.
Oh,
hey, what about No, you still have contacts in NYPD, like in the past 15? No. What about the past 15, 20 years?
What?
In the past 15 or 20 years.
The only time I hear from anybody in the NYPD if they have a specific thing to ask me. And I know a couple of years ago here, we had threats here and I couldn't get anything locally. And I called the intelligence division, and it was kind of funny. The lady answered, checked it out. She says, "Oh my God," she says, "you're a legend." I says, "No shit." But no, other than that, I have nothing. You know, when they need something, they'll call me.
Did you have any contact with Giuliani over the years?
Oh yeah. When I was in, you know, he was one of the good prosecutors when we were working on this stuff, and even after I retired. You know, I was retired officially, but then there was other people who jumped in, and I still, to this day yet, like I say, people come to see me.
Did you ever have any contact with Keith Schiller, Trump's head of security?
No.
Are you familiar with... Go ahead.
Huh?
Are you familiar with the work he did for the Fisher House?
No, I'm not. No.
Are you familiar with the Fisher House and their hiring of on-duty and off-duty police officers at NYPD?
Geez, not particularly the Fisher House, but I can probably name 100 other places that did the same thing.
Yeah, what is that?
You know,
and what is like?
Because it's like I was retired, and I gave a speech down at Sarah McClendon's down in the National Press Club, and I went back to my hotel room, and a man came to see me, and they wanted me to go to work as a personal consultant to a president, and I'm not going to name the president, because you go back in Nixon's days, who was it? Ulazowitz. He was a New York detective. You know, you got to remember, there are guys like me all the time in the police department. There are guys there that know what's happening, and there's other people that know that, and why wouldn't they hire you?
Yeah,
the only reason I didn't take this because the guy was certain things he didn't want to tell me, and I said, then I'm not going to work for you.
Let me ask you this. During the campaign, there was a story going around. In fact, Eric Prince from Blackwater fame was even doing interviews about it, where they were saying that they had Anthony Weiner's laptop, and there was all kinds of incriminating information on that laptop about the Clintons. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah. Did you ever read the book Compromise by John Cummings and Terry Reid and them about the Clintons? When that book was written, it was sent to me to critique, and then they brought me to New York. I was living in Maine at the time to have dinner with them to go over the book. And that's another one that has all the stuff in about Mena, Arkansas, Terry Reid, and what was his name that ended up dead?
Vince Foster. Vince Foster.
No, yeah, Vince Foster, but the drug guy, they had put him in the protect.
Barry Seal.
Barry Seal, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a lot of stuff out there on that.
Okay, good. Get me those guys. I want to interview them. Okay, let's hook me up with them if you can.
John Cummings. The book is called Compromise.
Okay.
By John Cummings. I and Terry Reid were the two guys, and it is again, like I said, it was sent to me to critique, and I went to New York and sat down, had dinner with John, and went over everything, and then the book was published. So there's other people, there's information out there. Who's got it all, I don't know. But that wasn't hard to find at that time because it was out there.
Your experience with the NYPD, do you think it's possible that if they found incriminating information on Anthony Weiner's laptop, that they held that back and used it for their own purposes?
Now, that is a question that is self-answering. What do you think they do? The New York Police Department, I'm going to tell you something. I was in there at levels most people didn't even know existed. In fact, there were very few cops that even knew this happened. I personally was cut loose. That meant I answered to no one. And my job was to get information, and if they needed it, they'd call me. Yes, that's what they do. That's why they have such a good intelligence system. You know, you get the information, and you have it. Because they're just like I am. when you go with it, your career is over. Why would they destroy their careers? Why would a man, the fifth highest ranking guy in the police department, call me into his office, turn the music up and show me this thing on Dr. Rockefeller, Quasimodo, and then burn the paper in an ashtray, and never a word was said. All he did was nod, and I nodded, and that was how I got that case.
I don't even know, but we get there already. And I've been showing back a couple of weeks we talked because somebody sent me letters about Johnny Gush and like that.
Oh, yes, it was not. It is probably the cover up when it gets into the human trafficking in this country, and that's a direct result of the boy E64 Street.
Okay. So we'll continue. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Okay, there we had Jim Rothstein, mayor, little Minnesota town, not Wisconsin, Minnesota. And a lot of good stuff, man. I tell you. Anyway, thank you so much, Jim Rothstein. we'll think about it, okay? I'd like to check about the House Member Sec. Support. It's been a long time. We haven't gotten any donations in the past few days. It's been about a good 5 or 6 days since we've gotten anything. I was expecting something over the week, and we haven't had anything. And we're still struggling with these bills and these expenses and stuff like that. Okay, guys? But 3 months on my credit card, we really got to clean that up before we can go forward. And I really would like to get the show actually progressing instead of just surviving. So thank you so much. Hey, do you like the work that he is doing here in Report? You can at work becoming a member at OppermanReport.com. And as you have access to over 200 exclusive shows and interviews that you can't find on YouTube or Spreaker or iHeart or iTunes or KYAH. You can't find them anywhere else online, exclusive to our member sections to our members. You can also make a donation at OppermanReport.com. If you want to support the show and become a member, I can give you a discount. I'll give you $13 for $65 if you email directly at OppermanReport@gmail.com. And don't forget, you can hear your ad here on hundreds of thousands of honest people over contact me at gmail.com on a good advertising rate.